Audiences always want to know who is the speaker, what is the speaker's background, and how can the speaker help us? As far as my career highlights, I have a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering and a minor in applied mathematics from the Ohio State University in the United States. In addition to this, I have a master's TEFL from Bridge TEFL with endorsements in grammar, vocation, test prep, and evaluation. These achievements have allowed me to serve international communities, both civil and defense, with technical documentation assistance, professional English training, e-learning games, courseware including textbooks, and evaluation software. I will show a few samples of my current works later in the presentation, but I will leave this slide for reference purposes. I will start the presentation off with a simple diagram and a simple question. How do you determine whether your English is correct or not? Before providing the answer to this question, we must understand that there are different types of English: technical, formal, and informal. Technical English, which is also called plain English, pure English, or layman's terms, relies heavily on grammar or syntax to objectively convey a message in writing or in speech in a concise manner. This means that the message should be understood the same way from one reader or listener to another without ambiguity. Often regarded as the most difficult and systematic variant, technical English requires a thorough understanding of parallelism, punctuation, registry, evidence, sequencing, structure, form, and function. Therefore, only skilled instructors should teach it. This variant of English is required in specialized fields, emails, reports, briefs, blue dot letters, white paper studies, objective journalism, and standards and procedures. Formal English, which often uses flowery language, requires a blend between grammar concepts, which are not strictly enforced, and poetic devices to present ideas in a stylistic way through writing and speech. Unlike technical English, which is objective, formal English is more subjective, so it requires contextual references to understand meanings. This is also called pragmatics. This variant of English is often used to provide opinions, to persuade others, to associate real life ideas with abstract thoughts, to provide connotation, to be polite, to illustrate moral lessons, and to report the news. Informal English, which is also called slang or street English, relies heavily on poetic devices rather than grammar to present ideas. Since the grammar is not important, resulting in fractured speech or writing, the idea has to be delivered figuratively through colloquialisms, idiomatic expressions, and socially known references. This variant of English is often used in music, movies, texting, and conversations with friends. It relies heavily on pragmatics. Depending on the setting, more than one English type may be acceptable. In business, for instance, entrepreneurs use informal English and punchlines to pitch products. They use formal English during hands-on meetings, and they use technical English in executive feasibility studies. Always know the purpose behind your line of communication. Always know your audience. Students and non-native teachers often wonder what is general English and what is standard English. General English refers to the overlap between formal English and informal English. Standard English refers to the overlap between technical English and formal English. In the past, there was no need to branch standard English into two types. However, curriculum guides have been watered down so much that formal English requirements do not necessitate syntactic English. An example of this would be the product approach versus the process approach in writing. The modern product approach allows students to express ideas without worrying about grammar. This means that the student is rewarded for developing a poorly constructed essay as long as the meaning and the key points are understood. This is contrary to the older process approach where the student has to demonstrate mastery of grammar and to provide a structured argument. As mentioned before, you must always know your audience. This slide highlights the differences in English styles during lines of communication. On the left, you have two technicians working on a car repair. How are you going to communicate a repair from technician to technician? Better yet, the processes and procedures required to perform the repair. In this case, you can communicate the repair using specialized terms from vendor supplied or OEM manuals, as well as shop talk, because this knowledge is shared between both technicians. However, what happens if the knowledge base is not shared? Maybe with a customer who is not familiar with car parts, or a newly hired engineer who understands car components in terms of CAD and mathematical equations. In this case, it is best to use technical English with a common word set, right? The same concept applies to the medical field. On the right, you have a doctor providing treatment options to a patient. The doctor cannot talk to the patient like a doctor because the patient might become more confused or more fearful. Instead of telling the patient that he suffers from esophageal motility disorder, as in doctor to doctor or doctor to nurse interface, the doctor should tell the patient that the poor muscle activity in his neck prevents food from moving through his esophagus in a normal manner. Notice how the specialized terms have been replaced by common words without causing confusion. The point of this slide is to illustrate the importance of technical English. Technical English allows you to use specialized terms or to break down specialized terms using simple definitions. Keep in mind, however, that specialized terms can shorten the communication chain since it aligns directly with standard documentation and practical terminology. In other words, providing a term is shorter than providing a simple definition. As far as basic language learning, where the standard is low for students, the instructor focuses on reasonable communication rather than short term or long term mistakes. The student is fighting to be understood, not fluent in the language. This is similar to the communicative approach. The student is often taught to skip over details and then accept everything until later fashion. The instructor oftentimes puts more emphasis on speaking and no emphasis on writing. There are memorized drills with workbook practice as opposed to open drills and role play exercises. The curriculum is often rigid, albeit systematic in lecture style. It is proficiency based. This normally alienates right brain learners who are more imaginative and kinesthetic learners who rely on hands on activities and games. The assessments are often unilateral, giving rise to false beginners and false internalization. The end result is normally to take a standardized test like TOEFL, IELTS, DLPT, OET, and so forth. The purpose of these tests is to determine whether a student can survive in an English speaking environment or not. The burden of accountability is on the student, not the teacher. This means that the student might be blamed for poor results even if the instructor failed to teach a course effectively. As far as advanced language learning, where the standard is high for students, the student is put in a position where she or he can quickly correct his or her own mistakes after the instructor has identified them. Is the world multiple choice? Clearly not. When you're communicating in the real world, a dialog box with choices A through D does not magically appear. This means that the student's mastery must extend beyond standardized testing to have practical value. The student navigates the language using the instructor to clarify mechanics and usage and to understand speech patterns, grammar, and deviations from their native tongue. There is an emphasis on sharpening language skills using focalized practice, debates, native breaks, and teach back sessions. These classrooms must be student centered in order to bring them to a much higher level of fluency. Curriculum adopts a flexible approach based on student needs. You also need a proficiency and growth model, right? It must be there. It must be used to audit the performance of the student and the instructor. As mentioned before, proficiency puts the burden of accountability on the student. However, student growth places this burden upon the teacher. I have published the first hybrid model software and algorithm for ESL training. Prior to this, educational administrators chose between the two after wasting time deliberating on which is the best. The answer is simple. Both are important, and teachers now have a resource to track them. Why debate over proficiency and growth when you can have both? The hybrid model is a diagnostic tool that can determine why a student is not reaching proficiency metrics and or growth targets. This determination is based on a series of calculations that reveal how the receptive variables and productive variables are interacting when the four language skills, reading, listening, speaking, and writing, are put to the test. Under ideal circumstances, the interactions between receptive skills and productive skills will be balanced. To channel this balance, the instructor must have the ability to identify student weaknesses and to correct these weaknesses using effective teaching techniques. The identification of weaknesses and the mitigation of weaknesses should always be stored in a needs assessment file because this file serves as a record for the actions and the contributions in the SLA process between the instructor and the student. In addition to this, the needs assessment file complements the hybrid tool, which is quantitative, with qualitative information that helps the instructor associate numbers to classroom observations. Ignoring the needs of students is a dangerous precedent to set in the language learning classroom. Due to time constraints, I will quickly cover data analytics, data extractions, and report generation at the class level and the student level. The main input of instructors is student scores. Once the student scores have been inputted, a series of tabulations are carried out to build a student overview. This overview includes performance points, growth targets, proficiency metrics, growth differentials, and student projections in both numerical and graphical form. All unfamiliar symbols and abbreviations are identified via mouse hover. As you all know, proficiency is a metric that is used to determine if a student can meet or can exceed a predefined benchmark or a baseline standard at a fixed point in time. In other words, it is not time dependent. I have included the following proficiency modules: unilateral, composite, band, and a new one, which is called the Butler Interaction Proficiency. Of course, educators can determine how they want to set thresholds, but we will use these thresholds for the individual presentation. So XRR refers to reading ratio. This is the listening ratio. This is the speaking ratio. This is the writing and grammar ratio. This is the composite proficiency. This is the band proficiency. And this is going to be the interaction proficiency based off of the interactions between receptive and productive skills. Unilateral proficiency is used to determine if a student can demonstrate mastery of individual language skills based on a predefined benchmark or a baseline standard. Notice how each and every language skill has its own threshold line. This is very important. Composite proficiency is used to determine if a student can demonstrate mastery across all language skills based on a predefined benchmark or a baseline standard. Band proficiency is used to determine if a student can demonstrate mastery by averaging scores across all language skills for comparison against a predefined benchmark or a baseline standard. Those students who have taken ILITs will be familiar with this level of proficiency. The Butler interaction proficiency is used to determine if a student can demonstrate mastery across all language skills based on an acceptable interaction between receptive variables and productive variables. Directly after this, we have a module for the Butler hybrid model. This is a very critical model that incorporates so many items inside of it. The construction of this model and the methodology for the growth targets are mathematically strenuous. However, they are well documented for those who would like to know the theory behind it. The purpose of the hybrid model is to track how the receptive variables interact with the productive variables. Educators can select from three different course profile types: balanced normal, balanced aggressive, or communicative weighted. For educators who are looking for better alternatives to the student growth percentile model, value-added model, and the value table model, you have come to the right place. Student growth in language learning refers to the differential changes in receptive skills and in productive skills from one performance point to another performance point. These differential changes, which can be correlated with normative measures at a student level, a classroom level, or an institutional level, indicate the direction of student progress. There are three growth modules inside of the hybrid ESL calculator. Student progress, which is on the screen right now. We have ratio progress. And then we also have growth projections. They track receptive variables and productive variables as a function of time. Some schools focus on accent reduction and L0 breaks. So I have also added a module for phonological checks. The needs assessment verbiage on the right is trivial. However, it serves as a reminder that instructors should do their best to meet student needs. I will rapidly click through this, but notice that we can also show the results at a class level. You can see here for the same course, you can superimpose all of the students who are on your roster in order to look at your class results collectively. How many times have students inquired about their percent growth after a course ends? Has the teacher ever been able to supply a value or report with objective evidence? Clearly, the answer is no, but now teachers have a tool at their disposal. We have set up a data extraction module here, and you can do it at the student level or the course level. What happens is that it's going to populate a spreadsheet just like this that can be easily manipulated. So if a student comes to you and the student asks specifically for growth percentile, this is for one student here, then all you would have to do is simply go here and then you can sum it up here and you can say, okay, well, the sum is 0.45, which means that from the beginning of the course to the end of the course, the student experienced a 45% growth in their receptive skills, which is listening and reading. And then you can come over here to the productive differential, and you can see that the student experienced roughly a 51% growth in their productive skills, which is writing and speaking. You can do the same thing for the other students, but just know that now this metric is available. Remember that this hybrid ESL calculator is a tool, and the reliability of the tool is only as strong as the data inputs. In other words, poor inputs into the tool equals poor outputs from the tool. Educators can also generate reports at the student level and the classroom levels to present information or to refine their goals. Once again, the ESL calculator is a one-stop evaluation tool. If we go back, you can see that you have a whole entire module for setting up reports, right? You can do it at the student level. You can also do it at the course level. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what the template looks like. So for the student report, you can see here that it basically pulls all of the data from the hybrid ESL calculator in order for teachers, instructors, administrators, and educators to communicate all the information about a particular student to other people. All of the terms, all of the metrics, including the methodology, has been provided in here as such. The same could be said about the course level. If you look at the course assessment profile, it pulls in all of the data from each and every student of a given course so that educators at all levels can determine what needs to happen, what needs to change, what is the status, what is the progress. It also can keep them informed about what's going on in the classroom as it's continuing uh, on a month-to-month basis. Once again, everything that you need is here. Before we continue, I want to add a few comments. Although I target ESL classrooms, the coding can be adapted to other subjects as well. All educators are encouraged to use the hybrid model as a tool for collaborating with professional colleagues to support language learning objectives, setting complex pass-fail thresholds that incorporate both proficiency and growth at any level, evaluating how demographics or socioeconomic factors can play a secondary role in learning, determining how instructors can design lessons to teach a larger range of students, responding to learning difficulties in a timely yet objective way, holding students and instructors accountable in the SLA process, conducting comparative analysis at the individual level, the class level, and the institutional level, determining how students can be reasonably challenged at any level, determining if students are engaged in the classroom, maintaining a comprehensive record of student achievement, reporting student achievement to the administration for feedback, integrating curriculum expectations into current teaching practice, reflecting on current practice to determine if the needs of students are being met, modifying and refining teaching approaches alongside quantitative observations, as well as conducting independent research for optimization, curriculum improvement, ranking, and practicality. So we can see here that when we're talking about proficiency and growth, it is a big deal. It is a very big deal, especially for a student-centered classroom. Before we discuss this slide, all viewers should ask themselves the following question. What type of student are you? Students should always take control of their learning experience. A beginner student does not ask questions. An intermediate student asks why or how. And an advanced student says, prove it. Prove it to me. When it comes to English, an instructor should always be able to prove the grammatical nature of a sentence using syntax and definitions without causing contradictions. This is very important since language material is not perfect, and an instructor has to identify errors in answer keys, grammar concepts, and student elicitation. This leads to the following question. Are we teaching students how to use the English language or how to pass an English test? No one can deny that many English institutes in the MENA regions are only teaching testing hacks to help raise student scores on standardized tests like the TOEFL, IELTS, TOEIC, CAE, OET, and so forth. How do these tests reflect student growth? This is a trick question because it cannot reflect student growth at all. Test hacks can only go so far because the world is not multiple choice, and students will go into a career field sooner or later where they are expected to use English fluently. Therefore, the student must find the confidence to perform without assistance from the teacher. Many English institutes in the MENA regions are also still using unqualified instructors, both native and non-native, right? These instructors oftentimes bypass the minimum requirements due to origin, some degree, or personal references. Remember, all teachers aren't good teachers. Schools should always vet teachers beyond a degree and should ensure the accuracy of approved lesson plans and or language content. Teachers must know English and the language learning process. Most instructors do not realize that the scales for ESL learning is not equivalent to, to the scales for English natives, right? We have to quit equivocating this. Some instructors do not track or do not keep record of classroom observations. This is a big problem. How can a teacher meet the needs of a classroom without observation notes? Better yet, how can administrators improve the quality of education if the teacher fails to communicate classroom issues? Instructors have to be well trained in the SLA process. Some institutions are using courseware and textbooks that are created by non-native speakers. This can be very risky, especially since non-native speakers have a natural bias to their native language. There are also issues associated with word stress, verb choice, word choice, and technical usage. Always use reputable sources because low quality material leads to low quality results. I have compiled also a list of questions for a few institutions just to determine, if a teacher is good enough to be in your given classroom. Number one, students and administrators reserve the right to ask about the credentials of any English instructor. Remember this. There's no reason to be shy, right? They must have these credentials as a baseline. Two, does the instructor understand the language learning process? You have to remember that there are some English teachers who are not bilingual. They do not understand the pressures of sitting in the seat being a student and trying to learn a new language. They have never ever gone through that. So how can they say that they have mastered the language learning process if they've never even attempted another language? Three, Does the instructor have a command over the English language? 4. Does the instructor have a mastery of English composition? We have to make sure that the teacher has the ability to write. Writing is very important, and oftentimes, when it comes to English speakers oftentimes speak the same way that they write. So if they can't write, normally that's an indicator that they won't be able to speak with the proper form either. So this leads into 5. What you should always do is ask for writing samples, both technical and expository, because technical English requires you to understand the true form and the true meaning and the true structure of what English has to offer. Expository writing is more on the formal end, but once again, it serves the purpose of teachers presenting their own arguments in a systematic way, right? You have to verify this. Number 6, always make sure that the instructor has had some teaching experience inside of the classroom. Why don't instructors provide custom courses? Foreign companies always ask me this question. Many universities cannot handle flexible courseware, but I accept this challenge. We have to remember two things. First off, teachers are normally accustomed to creating lesson plans based on a prescribed curriculum framework. The baseline framework is normally adopted by other industries and it targets analytical thinkers. Lastly, teachers are not engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs, etc., even though they are challenged to help working professionals communicate in every career field. In order to meet this need, you must find an instructor who has knowledge of trades, technical experience, curriculum development experience, SLA training, and applicable degrees. This is a rare blend, however, it is possible. Moreover, this particular instructor must create an engaging framework conducive to adult learners or young learners, depending on who's in the classroom. Learning should be fun and should have real world applications. What better way to have fun than through gaming? I will show you a small snippet of a game that I'm working on called English Voices. This concludes the lecture. If anyone needs authentic material with real world application, you can adopt my self published textbook, English the Native Way. I am an educational freelancer in the UAE, and my office is located in Dubai Knowledge Park, Block 9. So feel free to reach out to me for more information or course assistance. Thanks for tuning in.